Hi, and welcome to the Healthcare CEO Show, where you'll find actionable insights on healthcare leadership from the best and brightest in the industry. I'm your host, Daniel Fernandez. Let's get a pulse. With me today, I have Dr. Scott Powell. Dr. Powell is a physician partner at Florida E.N.T and Allergy, and one of the original 4 practitioners. Today, we're going to talk about what it's like to work in a fast-growing organization, and I know Dr. Powell is excited about some of the newer technologies that are making their waves in healthcare today. But before we get started, welcome to the show, Dr. Powell.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
As one of the first original 4 practitioners 13 years ago to a team of, how large is the team today?
We're 25 physicians.
25 physicians. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's a recent merger taking place as well?
Yeah. So our group here in the Tampa area, we were loosely associated with a E.N.T group. But essentially, our group joined with a group of 65, which is spread out across Florida. So now we're, approaching the magical 90 to 100 person mark.
Wow, so that's got to now make you probably one of the largest groups.
Well, by definition, we're the largest single specialty E.N.T group in the country, because the only other group that's larger would be New York, but they have allergists and other people in their group.
Okay.
So that's our kind of feather in our cap now.
Now, I can imagine over the last 13 years, you've learned a lot of things over the years. If we could today go outside, we're going to go out to the parking lot, we're going to jump in our DeLorean, and we're going to transport ourselves back to 13 years ago. What are some of those lessons learned that you would sort of maybe tell yourself, or what would you tell Dr. Powell of 13 years ago today?
Well, I would definitely, the cliche of it's never as good as you think, it's never as bad as you think. Because literally just when we think we're settling down and have things at an even keel, stable, something's going to come along. Sometimes it's a negative come along. Sometimes it's a potential opportunity come along that we have to unanchor and move forward. And other times when things are going a different direction and something's going on that's adversary, we have to realize that it'll pass and we've moved through it. So those are big things where it's never too great and it's never as bad as you think.
Now, I'd imagine back then, with such a smaller team, you didn't probably have as many capabilities or team members as you do obviously today. Were there roles maybe added along the way that you felt like made an impact? Like a good example of that is, we didn't have an HR department early on, but we do today. Were there some of those roles that you kind of like knew would be essential that you've sort of added since?
Well, for a while there, when you first start out, and again, when we were 4 in 2 offices, everyone kind of wears multiple hats. And as you start to grow, it starts to cross over the mark where people can't do 1 or 2 things great. They just do a lot of things pretty good. Mm-hmm. And so when we started to almost subspecialize within the team, whether it be the physician side or definitely on our team side, between administrators and managers, once upon a time, we were 4 or 5 at the time. We took a pilgrimage up to the large E.N.T group in New York, and there are about 200 E.N.Ts. Wow. So we knew them, and we wanted to take it to the next level and said, okay, let's take a trip. We'll go up there and just kind of sit on their hip for a day and kind of learn how they became small to grew in an organized fashion. So we took from that, we added a call center and a call center manager who's been great. A lot of our team members kind of subspecialize and then they have a team. So the team didn't just kind of completely spread out forever to where everyone was wearing a bunch of hats. It became much more subspecialized in a more structured way.
That makes perfect sense. Were there any pivotal moments you can think of that contributed to the overall growth throughout the years?
Well, I'll say that, on that same pilgrimage we took, it was our decisions that, okay, are we going to break the status quo and try to make something in our area bigger and better? Because one of my partners, Dr. Miguel Rivera, he was kind of the linchpin of getting the local E.N.Ts to have a conversation to all play in the same sandbox. Okay. And then from there, it allowed that kind of coordination allowed, when we went from 4, and whether it be new docs or docs in the area decided, hey, we want to come join what their vision is. Right. And so having that trip and having that background of what we know we want to go, we just have to find the path that we're going to get there. And as I mentioned, as opportunities happen, as that small window of opportunity would happen, as painful as it might have been to tear away from the status quo, we would make that jump, make that leap, and then you go on from there.
Now, as a physician who's going through the various changes of scaling up, what goes through a physician's mind during that process? Because change can be very difficult.
It is, and it is very easy not to do anything and just kind of stay status quo. And so probably the biggest thing with the impetus to change is it's happening around us anyway in medicine. Whether we like it or not, it's happening. Either we evolve with it or it's going to evolve without us. And so the dangerous part about it is the over change or overgrowth too fast. I used to add it a lot of times. If we pull the Roman model and we overgrow too soon, we can crumble from within or just not produce the product. Because at the end of the day, yes, there is the business side of all this. It's a matter of fact. But if you don't provide the care for the patient, pretty soon your business is going to shrivel up and you're just talking theoreticals. So that's the biggest issue, is making sure you keep your eye on the prize. That this is all about caring for the patients first, and then everything else is kind of a backbone to that.
Our audience is comprised primarily of physicians who are leading organizations and healthcare executives. What advice would you give to the executive teams, executive leaders out there that are working with physicians through these stages of development and growth?
Find your leaders. You can't have everyone can't be the cook in the kitchen. Yeah. And so whether it's people take turns or certain people decide they want to be the ones to stand up and be a physician leader to help as it goes along, because essentially the C-suite or the administrators or the corporate type, they won't automatically get the respect of the group. And so having the partner physicians behind them and showing that all these things are, all in the same mindset, it becomes pretty quick that the physicians can hopefully, God willing, back off and be, just practice medicine and be a support structure more so than being the driving force. I tell physicians all the time, it's very difficult. Our day job is our day job. And if you're trying to run the business in its entirety during the day job, you start faltering and you can't do one really great. So then it becomes a night job, and then you start getting burnout, and then your work-life balance becomes to falter. And it's not a long-term solution. So on the administrative side, getting good leaders to back you up and pretty much support you is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, no, one of the wonderful things about you and your perspective is that you actually chose to go back and get your MBA, which is very unique in this space. What made you decide to do that?
Well, I was lucky during my medical school. Dr. Stillbegger, who was the dean of the medical school at the time, he had an MBA. He found the value in it. So he actually offered the incoming students at the medical school to do a dual program.
Wow.
So we were the inaugural class. And so essentially most MD MBA programs are 5 years, but he had planned to do ours in 4 for reasons I'll never know. So for the summers, we would stay behind summer before first year, before second year, before third year, and do courses in the business school. And then some people dropped out because they didn't want to bother with that. But there was those of us who stuck behind, were then working nights on third year and fourth year medical school, doing projects and doing the final courses and classes to finish out the degree. So that's how that laid out.
Do you feel like having that MBA has kind of helped give you a different perspective on the business, overall, seeing it through a different set of eyes, maybe, or contribute in some way?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think luckily I've always had that mindset and an eye for it, I should say. Mm-hmm. That definitely helped give me some background in terms of reading some of the documents that when you're in a meeting with, business types, acquisition types, what have you, you can at least read the document, P&L statements and so forth. You're not going to dive into and do a project on it, but you can still kind of at least speak the language because it can be a foreign language. But there are some people I know, my partner included, who that people have a knack for it. So there's some natural ability that some people have, but for me, it was nice to have that infrastructure that I can build on as I kind of go through and learn something. I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember, having that conversation. And I can go back and look it up and be like, oh yeah, refresher. That's right. That's what that's about. So it is nice that is a base for me for sure.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we've recently talked about your, merger with becoming a larger group. What ultimately led to that decision?
Well, we joined, whether it be coming from the 4 to the 12 to the 25 to now nearly over 90. The biggest issue was, how do we essentially protect ourselves? E.N.T is a weird world where there's not a lot of us in the country, in the world for that matter. And so there's a lot of external forces that are, pushing things a certain way, one way or the other, and everyone, tends to look out for themselves.
Yeah.
So in this standpoint, it allows us to have a little bit more control over how we can practice medicine. We're not being told what to do. We're not told how to do it. We can stay independent. So whether it be how we cover hospitals and cover our patients there, and having an even conversation with the hospital executives, if you will, versus being able to expand our ability to service the patients in different ways and different ancillaries and so forth, to just being able to keep up with the regulations that are coming down over and over, that if you're just one or two or three people, there's so much changes, you may miss it, and then you're in trouble and you're violating something. So this just allows somebody looking out for your back, and then vice versa.
Yeah, and sometimes I know there are obviously external factors. Like in 2008, we had the financial crisis, and most recently we had to deal with a global pandemic. I mean, is there strength in numbers as well?
For sure. During the pandemic, the closest example, it was during our current spring break. And so myself and the other managing partner were both away. And as this was happening, we were essentially spending the entire spring break on phone calls, deciding how we're going to do this. Yeah. And because we were big enough, had a team, we had some redundancy, and then we were, within the state, we'd had some connections. But yeah, we kind of knew what was happening before it was going to happen. We knew some of the guidelines to do from the CDC standpoint. We could roll out with protocols and processes in advance that all this was covered. Whereas if we were called all alone, you're essentially sitting there trying to just keep the lights on. And from our standpoint, it was a scary time for everyone. And I'm 45, and I can't imagine being more on the line so quickly at that point.
This is a big question. Is the age of solo practitioners dead?
I think it is. I think, well, I'll say it this way, except for some rural areas where they don't necessarily need more than one, which is probably becoming more and more rare in that sense. I just don't know how they could possibly, between covering for themselves and what they need to cover, and then worse off getting pigeonholed with insurance contracts and those type of things where they have no leverage. They're it. And if you have, Dr. Smith across the street has a group of 3, they'll just send the patients there, and then Dr. Jones doesn't have any leg to stand on. So it's unfortunate that I think it's going to be a very dying breed very quickly if it's not already.
Yeah, we recently talked with a CIO who's talking about how AI is now becoming baked into pretty much everything in healthcare, and that the smaller groups of physicians would just have no access to those capabilities. What are options for physicians today, like on the smaller side of things?
Well, I mean, really, as I see it, 3 generic options. You can go the route of single specialty, which obviously we have, which I think is, in my opinion, I'm biased, of course, is definitely the safest route. So, for example, our group of 90 plus, there's subdivisions. So we're not, some top-down corporate issue. We have some people in this group who are single or a double practitioner office, but they have this infrastructure behind them that they feel and they know that they have 90 others watching their back. Otherwise, you're hospital-based, hospital-owned, which can be single specialty or multi-specialty. And then the final one is going to be private equity, which is rearing its head quite a bit. We were approached on that as well, and it's everyone has their own sunset when it comes to their career, and it's a weird way to say it, but that's one of the only ways nowadays where you can monetize your practice or your career. Because if you retire, a lot of times nowadays there's no buyouts, and a lot of times it's just thank you and a firm handshake and you're out the door. Some people want to say, well, I built this practice, I want some retirement return.
Yeah. Are there any pros and cons of each of those? This kind of come to mind?
Yeah, going reverse, I think private equity it can overlap a little bit into the hospital-based or large multi-specialty group like that. because a lot of times they are going to come with contracts. So if you're 1Z, 2Z, a few people in practice and you're struggling with their efficiencies or contracting or whatever it might be, they can come in and just fix that. They'll just, they'll pay for it. They'll buy a portion of your practice, and then forever you're just kind of paying them a fee forever going forward. And the same thing goes to the hospital based. I think a lot of the primary cares I've seen have done that because they get less and less marginalized, more marginalized, and it doesn't affect them all that much as if they go to the hospital-based group, as much, I should say, so they're not going in the hospital, but they'll get the contracts. They don't have to worry about all the rigmarole and stuff that bothers people, bothers physicians. They don't deal with the business side. They don't want to deal with the contract and the HR. They just want someone else, and that's a completely reasonable want, is not to want to deal with that. And then finally, obviously, single specialty is you just have control of your life. It's I have a mantra that I always want to kind of be my own boss, and so I can only I have partners who are I live up to, but it's my own time, it's my own life. I decide if where I am and when.
Do you feel like as you've grown, you've been able to sort of maintain some semblance of work-life balance?
Depends who you ask, probably in my life, right? It
seems to be a hot topic lately.
Yeah, for sure. It is an ever changing answer for me, I guess I'll say. I get in a place where I think I'm doing well with it, and it kind of goes towards something happens in the practice that rocks the boat, good or bad. And meetings tend to drift towards the nighttime. They tend to be other than working hours, and so I find myself drifting the wrong direction. And I'll be honest, my wife has always been very good at luring me back, either softly or not softly, and telling me this, because her mantra is, listen, one day the kids will be gone and they won't care if you're there. Right now they care, so why not spend the time with them now? And that gets me every time, because she's right. This is no one's going to regret the other stuff. They're going to regret if they missed a few things with their kids. My kids are getting older, so I know that timeline is running low. So that's my big mental reminder over and over and over.
Yeah. Let's have some fun. We're going to go back into the time machine. We're going to jump forward. We're going to take a look into the future a little bit here. It's no secret that the world of healthcare has changed a lot over the last 100 years. Things have improved, newer discoveries and technologies. Some of the things that were once thought of as impossible are now possible. And then, of course, we have this pandemic where it's greatly reduced everybody's implementation timeline. Are there technologies that you maybe rolled out during the last year or so that maybe you had on your future roadmap that you rolled out very quickly? A good example of that may be like telehealth or something of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So telehealth happened in a microwave state, where that same week when we were planning for the pandemic, we were rolling out our telehealth makeshift options, because I do think that's here to stay. I do think it has a role in medicine for sure. Some areas way more than others. Ours is so procedural based that it doesn't have as much value, but there are some appointments that can definitely be done with a video. So that happened within a week's time. It was that if the silver lining is available, that's there. And I think that's definitely here to stay. I think, some of the stuff kind of going forward that I really, piques my interest. I think the AI stuff is both scary and exciting at the same time. I think there's some specialties who will be greatly impacted by it: radiology, pathology, maybe anesthesiology, where machines can start doing a lot of the work, and that's kind of scary as well. And then some of the virtual reality side and the surgical side is probably where it's going to affect us the most. There's a lot of software coming out where not only can you wear goggles and watch somebody, but they can become augmented reality to a point where you, with the camera set up, you feel like you're sitting and standing in the operating room next to the surgeon, almost to the point where you want to reach over and tap him on the shoulder, but he's not actually there. So that only is neat for training purposes, but they do this somewhat in some of the robotic world, where theoretically could that be then extrapolated to more rural and even third world areas, where you're walking somebody through a difficult surgery and you're there to kind of guide them over their shoulder as they're doing surgery, this or surgery that. So that kind of stuff I think has a lot of potential value to expand the medical opportunities.
I ran across something in orthopedics a while ago that, when you're talking about robotics, that it would actually perform the procedure. Do you see anything like that happening, where maybe a procedure could be performed remotely without with maybe just some local guidance?
Well, I've heard of the robotic side. So it started with prostate and obviously some of the general surgery world and I guess OBGYN world. So there's some talk of that where somebody could be in a different room, different country, continent, where they're seeing what the robot's seeing, and someone's just in the operating room as a rescue. And I've heard of that happening. So that's that's happening. Is it a switch where you're doing it and then the robot, just tracked your movements, and then the next patient comes in, the same thing happens? I don't think we're there yet. I think some of the AI side may input that at some point in time. But I mean, it's not to say there can't be some very basic things that learn. I think there's enough human error in the world that having AI looking over the shoulder, probably has some value. We just don't know where to draw those lines. It's interesting. It's a fun time.
It is a fun time. Yeah, there's just somebody called it the age of innovation right now, because innovation is happening at the speed of light, especially and specifically in healthcare. What does Florida E.N.T. and Allergy look like even in 5 years' time, maybe even 10 years' time? How is it going to sort of reshape based on some of these things that you see coming out? And this is really just a crystal ball, obviously.
Yeah, no, we've talked in, those type of timelines, and then just when we get into the exciting, interesting theoreticals, we get, pulled back to an unfortunate day-after-day reality.
Yeah.
We were at one point called Tampa Bay E.N.T. and Allergy, or Tampa E.N.T, and we changed it to Florida E.N.T. and Allergy because we did have a Florida division. Does that mean that I'm covering, offices in Orlando and Jacksonville? Absolutely not. But we do think that our model has a growth potential that people may see benefit of being affiliated with us. Now, as part of this larger, bigger group, that kind of is going to happen indirectly. We have some internal efficiencies and benefits within it. So we do foresee, expansion of that model. We do foresee the some on the surgical side of things, we're trying to push the envelope in terms of all new procedures being directly involved with the manufacturers and being on the forefront of research studies and all the fun stuff that you can do on the healthcare side that makes it more than just seeing the same thing every day in the office. We do like to make sure that when something news comes along, the patient says, "Oh, have you heard of this?" We're like, "Absolutely. In fact, we're doing that." So never want to be caught flat-footed. So that's kind of the main thing of keeping our footprint slowly growing in an efficient way, but also staying cutting edge with getting this information and this technology.
Yeah. Do you feel like the pandemic really gave us a nudge in the right direction? I feel like prior to this, there were still a lot of pencils and clipboards still out there, and there's fewer and fewer of those today. Now, obviously, with the introduction of telehealth and so on.
Yeah, I mean, some places don't even take cash anymore, right? So, I mean, that theoretically, cash and change is going away once and for all. Maybe the penny will disappear finally.
So true.
But yeah, I think so. I mean, I think most places realize that, and it may have been from our standpoint because we did have a significant drop from between what the governor kind of stopped us being able to do and patients being nervous coming in. There was a significant lag that allowed us to say, okay, we've got a little bit of a lull here. What can we do to optimize? We have less paper. We're now, and our system now is almost completely iPad based in terms of our medical records. So we have stuff like that where and everything can be signed that way, and minimizing paper to the goal is eventually being a zero paper practice, to be honest. And it's an ambitious goal, but I mean, if we can go to Mars, then I feel like we can probably tackle paper.
So true. Dr. Powell, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights. But before you go, a few closing questions I ask every guest. First one is, do you have a favorite book or a book you've read recently that you would recommend?
Ooh, a book that I read recently. One I won't mention because it's, I don't want to say it on the air, but it helped become my work-life balance up. Probably Blink. It's probably the one by Malcolm Gladwell.
Love Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah. So that whole book series, I kind of got tangled in just between reading some and then some books on tape when I was traveling. That one, Talking to Strangers, actually is a good one too. So Blink and Talking to Strangers by him, really Luke kind of sucked me in, and the way he looks at things is just really, really, really interesting.
Favorite quote?
It is what it is. Spin off of that is it takes what it takes.
What has the last year taught you personally?
That there's so much more than what I think is going on in my own world. Totally myopic in a lot of ways, where I think what's going on is, like I mentioned before, so much more important than it really is, or vice versa for that matter. So being home, kids being out of school or out of sports, eating dinner together was weird, but we force it now. And so I definitely learned to realize, to reprioritize that work-life balance, kind of force feed that down my throat again. So I really, and then not just in terms of my family, but going around and again, seeing neighbors and seeing people outside again and saying hello and going back to what, I feel like is a better way to be.
Yeah, I agree. Final closing thoughts. What would you tell our listeners, healthcare executive that's listening, another physician that's listening, leading an organization, advice you would give them? Floor is yours.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I'll split this off into two ways. I think from a physician standpoint, I think we all need to have a common voice. We really don't have a singular voice to speak for ourselves and our patients. We've given away a lot of that voice to whether it be corporate America or insurance company, whatever it might be. And so, not in an adversarial way, but in order to have a good, meaningful conversation with all parties, you need to have a united front. And unfortunately, on the physician side, like I mentioned, the day job occupies our time, but we can't really do that in a very very smart fashion. So having that unified front, so that all parties come to the table and have a conversation and make sense of things that we decide upon. Right now, it's this person's making a decision that doesn't help that person because that person's trying to affect this person. So just come together and just make decisions that are sound and on a united front with all parties involved.
Thank you for joining us on the Healthcare CEO Show. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform for more insights from the top. Until next time, lead boldly and care deeply. See you on the next episode.